Rebecca.
Hello.
So I wanted just to formally announce your welcoming to the group for Canadians with Disabilities and their allies on our segment, weekly segment, and today's Friday, April the 8th, and I've got Rebecca, Hayden's mama, and she's going to tell the true story of Hayden's legacy. I really, really would love to hear you talk about Hayden and live on his legacy. And so many people are going through a lot of emotional and traumatizing issues in the country. But your story is very touching, and I would love you to talk to us about how the system has let down you and Hayden and so many others.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. So I'll just kind of start at the beginning with Hayden. Hayden was born seemingly, quote unquote, normal. I didn't really think there was anything up until he started missing his milestones. So that was kind of my first experience with the system, because his doctor kind of ignored it, well, we don't do anything until they're at least a year old anyways. So basically that got pushed back, and he didn't actually see a pediatrician until he was almost 2.5. One day I was sitting on the bus with him, and I saw a giant sign for my region saying that they had a region-run program, if your baby's missing milestones or if you just want them assessed, and it was free. So I thought I'd get them out and had Hayden assessed, and clearly there was something wrong. So they actually helped me get into all the programs and everything he needed for physio and speech and all of those things almost immediately. And it was so lucky that we did, because that was the year they basically had their funding cut in half. There became a 3-year wait list for services. And this was basically like our city, like our big, huge facility in the city for basically all kids with special needs, from speech delays to physio school, all that kind of stuff. I just started doing a lot of research and looking things up, and I still couldn't get anywhere. So finally, he developed seizures. We finally got somewhere with the doctors because he had medical issues. But then that led to a whole other story, because basically his pediatrician denied that he had seizures for years, and it was in the time where we didn't all have cell phones, so I couldn't just record it and show it to him. I had to track down a video camera, which took months, and then I finally got it, handed it to him, and he's like, yep, he's having seizures. We already had like a long battle medically before we even got into any of the other systems. Hayden was undiagnosed for many, many years, other than the fact that he had microcephaly and trigonocephaly and just global delays, but he really didn't have a diagnosis, even though he was fully dependent. When we finally made it to genetics, nothing came back for years and years and years. So it was really a long road with him. So I guess I'll kind of just start, I'll fast forward kind of to the pandemic, because that's when really everything went downhill. Obviously, we were stuck at home since March 2020. We went absolutely nowhere. We saw nobody. Like, we were in complete lockdown for a really, really, really long time. So he had no school, obviously. We had no respite, we had nothing, but at least we still had semi-decent funding because he was still a youth. So everything we'd had in place since he was 3 years old was still in place. Then so anyways, I think obviously everybody's exhausted by the pandemic, as were we, and it came around that this September that they were no longer doing online school for the ACE classes. So he was basically at home with no school, no access to anything. All his doctor's appointments were delayed. He was developing severe scoliosis, and he really desperately needed to go to clinic to get a back brace. But, he was on a wait list still from October 2019 to get into clinic. Even if he did, there was nowhere to fund it, because in that process he turned 18. And we lost all of our funding. So basically, we went from a decent amount and at least things being covered. We still got a diaper allowance. We still got ACSD, so we had that payment. We had a decent disability tax credit on my, child tax credit, so that was substantial. So we could still kind of make do during COVID because I couldn't work either. So I run a daycare from my house, so obviously I can't have kids in the house when I had Hayden. So that, was a huge hit, but we could kind of squeak by in life. Then he turned 18 and we switched to ODSP, and it turned into a nightmare. Like, first we applied right when he turned 18, and then they took months to approve it, and then they didn't back pay. They said it was to the date they approved it, not the date we applied. So he missed out on almost 2 months of funding in the first place for that. All of his other benefits were completely gone. So we had to start the application process for DSO funding that would deal with basically all of his needs. And we had to apply for diaper funding through ODSP. Well, the diaper funding took 6 months, and it took multiple phone calls, and then finally I had to contact my MP because they still hadn't approved it, and it was costing me hundreds of dollars a month. My MP contacted disability, and then that was one less thing. But process of DSO for us was a 6-hour interview for one thing, a massive application, and then I think 8 months to even get the interview started, and then they put you on a wait list for 3 years. So when we were talking about autism funding and stuff, it's the same funding structure as the autism program. So we were given $5,000 advanced because they were so far behind, but we couldn't use it for respite or anything that we would actually use it for. We could only use it for community activities. So basically in a pandemic, when everything is closed, we're, given this funding that's pretty much useless. DSO is the adult, I forget what it stands for. I think it's development or something. But it's basically all the funding, like for his equipment and like all of the stuff that he would need through that, respite, all of those kind of things. Those all come through DSO funding, not through ODSP. Which is fantastic. I mean, we've had it forever, but at the same time, even when he was younger, and it was just respite funding, it wasn't the passport program, it was the special services at home, and I forget what the other part of it is, but it was that program. And Hayden, who's fully dependent, qualified for $2,200 of funding per year at $15 an hour for a respite worker. So it really is not great funding either. So it's all underfunded, but by the time you're an adult, it's basically like they say, hey, you're on your own now. Good luck. Hopefully you have family that can take care of you because, the government doesn't want to, so.
Wow, that's so sad.
Yes. So, anyways, to move along, I guess. So, because of all these things, because of the scoliosis especially, he passed away kind of suddenly, but not suddenly. Like I could see him just going downhill. We had tried lots of things, like with school, because he had no school service. So I had wanted his stander and his equipment to come home so he could get exercise and whatever, because again, if you're at home, you have no support and no funding for home equipment, but school gets all the good stuff. So he had a custom stander there that was custom for him, that's just gathering dust, and they wouldn't allow it ever to come home. So, he just kind of went on a decline and slowly got worse and worse and worse and just more tired and more tired. And basically what we think happened is just his scoliosis got too bad. It was pressing on his lungs and his heart, and he just kind of wound down. So so that's what happened in our case, but it was so many failures of everything. Just, it's been a really bad couple of years for anybody with disabilities or any caregiver, anybody taking care of anybody. This pandemic has just literally been a living hell for everybody.
Rebecca, it's so sad that the system has failed Hayden, like big time failed Hayden, because it didn't have to be that way. And your advocacy for change is so important, and I admire everything that you are doing of telling everybody the story of the system that has literally completely alienated people with disabilities. It's like they put a blind eye to it, a deaf eye. They know how to fix it. They just don't want to fix it, and they have to fix it.
Yeah, when Mike Morris did a speech on the floor and he was talking about Hayden, and before he did his speech, he had called me and went over what he was going to say, and he asked if there's anything I wanted to change, and I kind of thought about it because I had said dealing with the government feels like being in an abusive relationship, and he said, "Do you want me to change that?" And because I thought it sounded harsh, and I thought, no, that's exactly how it feels a lot of the time. It's just really you have no control over anything, really. You're at their mercy all the time, and people, like you said, it's like we care about these people but we don't care about these people, and the people that aren't cared about know it. Like, what do you think that does to people's mental health? It's a terrible part of the system.
When Mike Morris, such a great person, and he had brought the story to my attention, and that's when I reached out to you. When I heard his powerful speech that he gave regarding your son, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really touched me emotionally because I had a friend who, same thing. It really touched home on me. And when I heard that story, and then I heard like your story, I thought right away, I need to have Rebecca on my show and talk about your son. And it really means a lot to every single Canadian who needs to hear this, because you are right. Like, you're right. Disabilities can happen to anybody at any time in life. They're either born with it or they develop it later in life. And yeah, like nothing, this should never have happened. And we need to change the system.
I just want to say a couple quick things, since I see my parents are no longer listening, because I love them dearly. But I also want to say that, I have a very supportive family. They'll be there for whatever I need financially. They're always there to support. If I need, someone to come to the hospital with me, I mean, they're amazing. But even they don't understand the system. Like, there are things that they learned after Hayden passed away, once they started seeing how the government operates, and they were just outraged. And I kind of felt like, I've been trying to tell you this for 18 years, but they have to see it to actually understand it. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that just impacts so many people. And in my case, I always considered myself lucky because Hayden knew nothing. He was my hippie baby. He was just the chillest guy ever, and he didn't understand anything, what's going on around him. So he was just always happy. So I can't imagine being somebody that's disabled and taking that mentality on myself too, right? So my heart goes out to everybody that knows that they're being abused by the system, and it just breaks my heart.
Yeah, it's a systemic issue for sure, and it's all politically driven. Where it's the system has failed and it has to be modernized. It needs to be completely rewritten to today's standards. I mean, it should have been a standard right from day one. There should always be an adequate standard of living. And it is under Article 28 of the Conventions of Persons with Disabilities under the Act. And I'm going to keep putting pressure on the federal government to enact that. I had a reporter contact me, and he says, I just want you, Brent, to tell me right off the cuff exactly everything that's going on. I was asked one question by the reporter is, if somebody wanted to know more about this, who knows? Like, who knows what people's lived experiences are? I go, the person with a disability. He goes, exactly. Now, he said the misconception that the public in general have is they think that the system, as people know it, think that people with disabilities in Canada are protected under the Charter. Is that correct? And I put, no, we're not. We're not protected under the Charter whatsoever, because people think that all their equipment, all their medical needs, all their income supports, their rent, everything is all in one. I said, and people think that some of this stuff is all on top, like your rent is on top. No, it's included in the actual support amount. He was blown away. He was completely blown away. And I said, do you think the government will ever admit that? No, they don't want that, because they just want to get the brownie points, right? But that has to change.